Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Brick, and I'm the school social worker for Deep Here Schools, and I'm here with Dr. Tiffany Bourne of Bellin. She is a child psychologist who works at Bellin in East Deep Here, and she works with a lot of our students, actually, and we have a very excellent and close working relationship with her, and she's done a lot of staff development and some parent outreach for us, and she did a presentation last week for our staff, and probably over the last 2 weeks. And it was really well received by our staff, and we felt like parents needed to hear this too. So we brought Tiffany on board to talk with you all a little bit about taking care of yourself during COVID-19, and also what that experience is like being a parent too. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Tiffany to do her discussion. I want to let you know that if you do have questions, Tiffany does have breaks built into the presentation, and you can access those by clicking on the link, and it'll take you right to the question page. So feel free to type in your question, and we'll take, we have some planned breaks in here to answer your questions as we go. So Dr. Bourne, take it away.
Technology failed right away. I couldn't unmute myself. I'm sorry about that. Thank you guys all for joining on this Monday afternoon. I really appreciate you being here for this important topic. I wish that I could see your faces. It's weird for me to talk to a screen without seeing faces, at least in response. But please do share any questions that you have with Melanie as the way that she explained, and we'll take time to answer those as we go along. So our plan today is to talk about the emotional and psychological reactions to the COVID-19 crisis, which also includes the safer at home orders and the isolation that has resulted because of that. We'll talk about how this might be impacting you and how it might be impacting your children as well as those that you love. We'll spend a lot of time talking about self-care for parents, because as you'll hear me say over and over, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not taking care of yourself and then what you need to feel okay and to feel healthy and happy, you're not going to be able to be there for those around you. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how you can do that. We'll also talk about how you can support the emotional and psychological needs of your children and your other loved ones, because I know as a parent, that's top on your priority list. We'll spend some time talking about how you can support distance learning, as you all have had to take on a new role as an educator during this time. And we'll have some conversation and question and answer times throughout the presentation. Just a quick disclaimer before we get going here is that I'm aiming to provide the best evidence-based information that we have, but it is general information. It is designed to talk to a broad population. So it might not be specifically what you need in your case. So please keep that in mind. It's not intended to treat any particular individual. And I'm certainly not in the context of a therapeutic relationship, which makes it more challenging to answer those kind of particular questions. So please feel free to ask those questions, but I might not have the answer for what to do in your particular case, not knowing your family as well as I know those that I work with. So how might you and those that you love be reacting to COVID-19 and the crisis that we're dealing with this time? You might find, as I find, that it kind of depends on the day, might depend on the time. Some days and sometimes I feel like I've really got it under control. And other times it feels like I'm really struggling and might not be being successful in anything. And from talking with my patients and families that I work with, as well as my friends and my family members, this is really typical. This is normal during these times to feel this kind of up and down roller coaster of emotions that we all deal with throughout our lives when we have good days and bad, but might be more peaks and more valleys during this time. It might be moving more quickly between those than we're used to. And this is normal during this time of constant stress and collective stress. We're all to different degrees dealing with isolation. So not being able to be able or be around those that we are used to being around throughout most of our days. So for many of us, this means we're not going to work. We're not seeing our coworkers on a daily basis. We might be working from home. For those of us that are still going to work, we still might not be able to go to Starbucks on the way to work and see the barista that we're used to seeing on the way to work, or getting to go and see friends and family members and to do those activities that we look forward to. We've had major changes to our daily routines, which are those big things like going to work or our kids going to school. But again, as I mentioned, are those little things that we take advantage of, and like going out to eat and going out on an anniversary dinner. We may be feeling grief, and this is grief in a number of different ways. It might be grief over a loss of feeling of control. So not knowing what's happening in your life or what to be expected. It might be grief over our feelings of safety and security. In general, when we're not under a crisis, we typically feel pretty safe and secure going throughout our day. And under the coronavirus crisis, we always seem to have the back of their mind, well, is this a safe thing for me to do? Am I doing what's right for me and my family? We might be feeling grief over the loss of important events. So birthday parties, vacations that you've been really looking forward to. Getting to go to church for a lot of people is an important event that they might be grieving. One that's big for me is this grief over the loss of ability to plan. We don't know when this is going to end and when things are going to get back to a semblance of normal. So it's really hard to make plans for the future because we don't know what things are going to look like. And we also may be feeling grief over loss of connections as we are more isolated. And we'll talk a lot today about how we can stay connected even when we physically can't be near each other. We might be feeling anxiety, and this could be anxiety over getting sick, could be anxiety over our loved ones getting sick or passing away. And it can also be anxiety over these unknowns. That's the biggest thing that's come up for a lot of the families that I work with is we don't know. We don't know, have the answers to the questions, and that can be very challenging. And we're also, as a society, starting to deal with the economic upheaval and financial concerns, which to varying degrees are impacting all of us in some way or another, but to some of us are impacting us very significantly. So we're going to talk a lot today about what we can do and what can be helpful. But the main point that I want you to leave with is that your stress reactions are normal. They're not pathological. It is normal to have these responses and to be upset and to get irritated more often and to feel sad or depressed when we're underneath these circumstances. We're having normal human reactions to extraordinary human events. So oftentimes we feel guilty about our emotions. We feel bad that we feel grief, or we feel badly that we are upset that we're missing out on something that's important to us when others might be feeling sick or might be dealing with coronavirus more directly. But it's okay to grieve and it's okay to feel your feelings. And when we start to normalize that, we start to be okay with the fact that we're not always okay, things just get a whole lot easier and we're more compassionate to ourselves and to those around us. So as a parent, how might this be impacting you? Well, first of all, your people. So all the different things that we just talked about are challenges for you as well. And you're juggling the needs of not only yourself, but your family. And for a lot of the parents that I work with, that's juggling the needs of themselves and maybe their significant other, also their kids, and in a lot of cases, their parents as well, or those that are elderly in the family. That's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on you. You are likely under significant stress because your work has likely changed. So maybe you're now working at home and trying to deal with working at home while also being a teacher to your children, while also dealing with all the rest of the household duties and things that are to be expected. Or you might still be going into work and then also having the stress over those choices and are feeling like you might be putting your family at risk and all of the responsibilities that are on you when you get home. Or you may have lost your job or have a change in your work, which can obviously lead to financial stress, but also emotional and psychological stress. Parents are responsible for supporting distance learning, which I have heard from almost every parent that I've talked to has been very difficult and has been a big change in their lives and as well as the lives of their children. And there's a lot of togetherness. There's a lot of time that we're stuck in the same space with the same people. And as much as you love your children or as much as you love your spouse or your parents, it's difficult to be spending that much time with those people and not having those kind of built-in breaks throughout the day that we're used to having. So it's likely that you feel like you're juggling an impossible number of tasks and goals. And you might feel like I do on some days that you're not doing very well with any of them and keeping any of those balls in the air. But I do want to tell you that you're doing a great job and we will work on trying to make things a little bit easier, but it's normal to feel like you can't keep it all going at one time. So where do we start? The first step is self-compassion. So feeling your feelings and accepting them, not feeling bad if you're feeling anxious or worried or angry or irritated or disappointed that you're missing out on something that's important to you. We'll talk about validating yourself and some mantras that can be helpful for that. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it's so important that you take care of yourself and your needs. You really can't pour from that empty cup. So we're going to spend time focusing on how you can feasibly do this. So finding a structure and routine that works for you. So setting boundaries. When are you going to check the news? When are you going to do distance learning with your kids? When are you going to have some time just for you? And I know with how busy you are on normal days, and especially now under this crisis, finding that time for you and that self-care might feel like such a struggle and that it just seems impossible. But can we carve out 5 minutes of the day, an hour a week, something that you can do that's your time that you can fill that cup and do what you need to help yourself feel the best that you can feel. This is the time for realistic goals. So especially when it's so difficult to plan because we don't know what the future is going to look like, it's not often the time to come up with a big, long-term, challenging goal. Now is the time to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do during this day or this week. Something that you can really put some work towards and see that goal achieved in that time versus that kind of longer term process. So what about your children? Well, we know that kids are experiencing worry and anxiety and fear and grief over the loss of routines and pleasant events in their life as well. And they might not be showing it the same way as adults. Oftentimes, kids lack the ability to communicate how they're feeling as much as adults can at times. They are likely missing the structure and routine of the school day. I have found this to be true for the vast majority of kids that I work with, even if they're not the kids that normally were excited to get up in the morning to go to school and might have some difficulties in the school setting. It's still difficult to miss out on that routine and that structure that they knew to expect. Kids have less social supports now. Oftentimes they're missing their friends and they're missing their teachers who are very important in their lives. Some are in their comfort zones, and I worry about these kids, the kids that are doing a little bit better now because they don't have to be in anxiety-producing situations. They don't have to be talking with other kids that might be stressful for them, and they can kind of sit at home where they feel comfortable. So I worry about what things are going to be for them when we have to go back into the kind of normal routine. Unfortunately, we also know that some children are in homes that are unsafe. With all of the collective stress, there's been an increase in interpersonal violence and likely an increase in child abuse as well. Understandably, when things get so challenging and parents that don't have the capacity to kind of deal with their emotional regulation and be able to kind of take care of their own emotions and what they need so that they can take care of their kids. And there's been a lot of increase in challenging emotions, and that can lead to unsafe situations. So if you are aware of violence happening in the home, please know that there are still resources available. You can always reach out to the crisis center. You can call the police if you have concerns. There are child protective services. And if you're in a position where you feel like you might be getting close to crossing the line and you need help, there are resources there for you too. So please feel free to reach out to get that help before it's too late. We also know that there is a subset of our population that deals with homelessness and not knowing where they're going to sleep that night or where they're going to get a meal. And that has been a concern and a problem in our area and in the world for a long time, but is getting worse underneath the economic crisis of the COVID-19. We know that kids with pre-existing emotional and behavioral difficulties likely are showing increases in these challenges during this time. And we also know that kids without pre-existing emotional and behavioral difficulties who didn't have these concerns in the past might start to show difficulties. So if your kids are starting to show kind of more irritation, more emotional breakdowns, more behavioral challenges than you're used to, first know that it's probably typical for that to be happening during this time. It doesn't mean that you're a bad parent, and certainly doesn't mean that they're a bad kid. I've also seen how kids are impacted by their parents' anxiety and stress. Kids are pretty perceptive, so they are noticing that things are different. They're noticing that you as parents might be feeling big emotions and might be struggling to deal with those things. And they're hearing little snippets of conversation, and sometimes, and in some cases, aren't able to fully kind of comprehend what's being said. So being on the lookout for any misinformation there that they might be picking up on. How do you talk to your kids about COVID-19? Well, the most important thing is that you do talk to them about what's going on in the world around them and how it might be impacting them. But you want to meet them where they are. So I always start with questioning kids. What have you heard? Where are you getting your information? What are your concerns? Because that can help me know what they're really worried about and any misinformation that might have come up. I've had a number of kids who have told me that they have heard that if they leave their house, they're going to get sick. So they are refusing to open the door and go outside and play outside because they believe that they're going to get sick outside. In a lot of cases, just knowing that can help us approach it more than just kind of seem like it was out of the blue that they would no longer go outside. You want to use age-appropriate language, so matching your child's language level when you're talking about these concepts. And you want to be honest but positive. So saying things like, yep, there's a scary virus and some people are getting sick. And our family is doing everything that we can to stay safe. We are washing our hands. We're not visiting grandpa and grandma right now. And we're using video chats instead of going in person to see our friends. focusing on those things that your family is doing to stay healthy can really be helpful. As I mentioned, kids don't often use their language to express how they're feeling, so watching their play can be really helpful. You might notice themes of illness and doctors and nurses and safer at home, and that can be a really great way to see what they're really thinking about and what they're working on in their minds. It's often helpful to have check-in times with kids, especially kids who are expressing or showing a lot of anxiety about coronavirus. So it might depend on your family, but this could be a check-in time in the morning and then maybe in the afternoon where you talk about any concerns that have come up, any worries, and kind of work through and problem solve. Not only does this let your kid know that you have these times set in the day so that they can express their worries, but it also allows them to have other times in the day when they're focused on other things. So if they know, well, at 4 o'clock, we always talk about our concerns and it's 2:30, maybe I can focus on playing outside right now and I'll worry about my concerns later. There are also a number of social narratives and social stories out there that use child-friendly language to explain the coronavirus, explain safer at home orders, why kids aren't at school during these times. So if you just Google like social stories and COVID-19, that can help you come up with some resources. And then Sesame Street, which I have the link here, and our wonderful IT guru, Josh, put the link in the YouTube video as well, that you can click on that and get some more resources. They have some great social stories as well as videos that help explain what's going on to kids. One thing that I've gotten a lot of great feedback that both educators and parents have found really helpful of a way to understand how we all are dealing with difficult times is this window of tolerance. And I really like it as a child psychologist that it's in a rainbow form here. I certainly can't take credit for this. I found this from a social worker online, but I really like how this presents things. So when we are in our best, we're in this optimal functioning, we're in the rainbow portion of this picture. So this is when we can kind of handle when things are going not how we want them to. We can problem solve, we can listen, we can grow, and we can learn. On either side of the rainbow are these clouds, and this is when things get too difficult for us to be learning and growing. So on one side, it could look like hyperventilating, extreme emotion, panic, or behavioral difficulties. On the other side, it's this kind of going the opposite direction. You might have a flat affect, slowed breathing, you might not even be fully present, kind of shutting down and emotional withdrawal. So it's kind of like the fight or flight. Our body's responses when we are in a time of stress that we can't cope with is we're either going to kind of attack back or we're going to freeze or we're going to get away from the situation as much as we can. Normal, healthy brains under optimal circumstances have a pretty big rainbow arc there. And this grows over time. So young kids are going to have obviously a smaller rainbow arc than older adults. But what we know is that some kids and some adults have a smaller arc. And this could be because of the result of trauma or neglect or emotional or behavioral challenges or just simply a low frustration tolerance. And what you likely know if you've ever tried to engage in a conversation with a child who is tantruming is when they or anyone is out of that optimal arousal, they're on one side or the other of the rainbow, they're not able to engage and have a conversation or problem solve. And typically, if we keep trying to push that during these times, we're not getting anywhere. And in fact, we're just making things worse. We have to allow that a person to have the ability to re-engage, take a break, come back to it when they've had time to regulate. What we know now is that during our times of stress, like the COVID-19 crisis is for all of us, we all have a smaller window of tolerance than we typically do. So if you typically have a pretty big arc and you're finding that you're having difficulty kind of tolerating your spouse's little nuances that usually don't bug you, but now are bugging you, or you're getting more irritated when people cut you off in traffic, or you're having a harder time staying focused at work, it's likely because your arc is a little bit smaller now because of the stressful times that we're all under. This also means that if you or someone that you love or work with already has a smaller rainbow piece to begin with, that's likely shrunk even more during this stressful time. And it's going to mean that they're going to be going more quickly from one side to the other than is typical. So why do I spend so much time in showing you this is because we have to be compassionate with ourselves and knowing that it's going to be normal for us to be going from one side to the other more than we usually do. And to understand it's okay to not always feel okay. And usually doing that and having that acceptance works a whole lot better to get us back into that rainbow piece and feeling bad about being on either side. That doesn't add to any usefulness for us. So it's being compassionate for yourself, but then also being compassionate for those that you're dealing with and loving and working with, and knowing that they might be going back and forth into those other ends of the rainbow more than they typically do as well. And if you're in your rainbow piece and they're not, maybe you don't have to show up to every fight that you're invited to. And maybe you just say, oh, they're losing their tolerance right now. I'm going to give them a break, or I'm going to kind of back off a little bit so that we're both able to get back to where we can be learning and growing. So as I mentioned, as a child psychologist, I like the rainbow picture a lot better, but this is just another way to understand the same concept. So in the middle is that window of tolerance. That's when your body is in the optimal state. You can be using both your reason and your thinking skills and your emotion. You're engaged. If you're hyper aroused, that's when you're overreactive. You might feel like your thoughts are racing. You might be emotionally distressed. Hypo aroused is kind of depressed, lethargic, might seem unmotivated, hard to get yourself to get off the couch and do anything. And we really need to work towards getting to that window of tolerance before we can do any problem solving or learning or growing. I will pause there to see if there have been any questions.
There are no questions yet. Remember, if you have any questions or any comments or anything, feel free to click on that link, and they will come right up to my screen here, and I will read them for Dr. Bourne, but there are no questions yet.
Great. Thanks, Melanie.
Sure.
One thing that's come up a lot during this period of isolation and social distancing has been loneliness. And unfortunately, Americans were pretty often lonely even prior to the COVID-19 crisis. There was some research done that said before this, about 3 out of 5 Americans felt a persistent sense of loneliness. That's a lot of people. And young people are especially likely to feel lonely. And we know that social media use leads to increased loneliness. So the more that one is online and on social media sites, the more lonely they tend to feel. This is kind of paradoxical because you think that the social media allows us to connect with one another, and it does in a lot of ways. And some social media use can certainly be healthy and a way to stay connected. But what we know is that we end up kind of comparing our whole lives, and sometimes the worst parts of our lives, to everybody else's kind of highlight reel. So it might seem like everyone else has more friends than we do, is prettier than we do because they have the better filters, is spending more time with other people and is well liked, gets more likes on their posts than we do, goes on the best vacations, and then we end up feeling poorly about ourselves, and it actually makes us feel more lonely. We know that being connected to others socially is a fundamental human need, and there's been research that's been done that shows that prolonged social isolation, not being able to be around other people, changes the structure and the function of our brain. So it really is impactful when we're not able to be around other people. So we know that this feeling of connection is essential to our well-being. There's been some studies that have shown that feeling lonely can be just as harmful, if not more harmful to your health, as things like smoking or using alcohol in a way that's unhealthy. So it's unsurprising that social isolation now can lead to the greater feelings of loneliness. We're having less social contacts, and we might be finding ourselves on social media more than ever before. And electronic means of communication just don't feel the same. We don't know exactly why that is, but we know that often having a Zoom call or a happy hour, it feels good and it's helpful, but it just doesn't feel the same as being in person. One suggestion might be that it's our mirror neurons, which is the part of our brain that kind of connects to what other people are doing and helps us feel that connection. Just might not work the same over a screen as it does in person. So how do we fight this? We know loneliness is a problem. We know we have to feel connected, but we're very limited right now. Well, I think the first thing is we know how important it is so that we make plans to feel connected with others, even though it's challenging at this time. So thinking to yourself, who are you connected with and who do you want to be connected with? Who in your family or your friend group really needs those connections as well? And how can you make those happen, even if it's not as easy as it typically was? Thinking about who your children are connected with and who they're missing out on seeing now, which can be difficult with kids that might not kind of bring up a list of names of people. When I gave this talk to educators a couple weeks ago, as Melanie said, a big feedback that I got from them when I was talking about the same point was that keeping that connection might be more important than any academic lesson. So teachers reaching out to kids or kids reaching out to teachers and feeling that they're still connected even though they're not physically in a building together has been more important than any math lesson or any reading lesson. And I love education, and I share this with the teachers too. And I think education is so vital and important. But if your choice right now is between forcing your kid to do a math assignment and having your kid get on a Google Meet with their teacher and having that one-on-one connection, I would much rather that they get on that Google Meet and have that positive connection, because it's so essential during this time that kids and we all feel connected to other people. And the feedback that I got from that, yes.
Can I ask you, I had a good question come in, and I don't want to wait because I know it's a little bit of a gap before we have another break, but we did get a question. It says, how does social media cause increased loneliness? My young adults think that they are more connected on social media. Can you please expand on this topic?
Sure. There's a lot of reasons. One that I talked about a little bit was our comparing ourselves to other people's kind of best selves. And this just comparison in general of looks and who's interacting with others, how many likes do we have, can make us feel lonelier or less than. And it's the quality of that connection as well. Having hey, how are you? Or liking something or viewing someone's TikTok video just doesn't feel the same as an in-person conversation does. So yes, it gives us that kind of immediate social gratification, but it doesn't give us that kind of long-term impact as a full friendship or full interaction with someone does. We can have virtual friends from all over the world, and it doesn't mean that that's not meaningful. I'm certainly not telling you to go delete all your social media accounts, but we know if that's all we're doing, that's the only place we're getting that social interaction, it tends to lead us to feeling more lonely and less connected than if we have some in-person, real and deeper, meaningful connections. Thank you for the question, Melanie. So I was talking a little bit about keeping that connection through education and educators. And I just wanted to share that the teachers that I talked to all shared that kind of the same feedback. No one was like, well, no, I'd rather have them do their math homework than connect with me. So I just wanted to share that your kids' teachers are missing them as well. And they miss feeling that connection too. And that it's meaningful for them as well when they get to connect with you and with your children. So if you're fighting loneliness during this time, how can you do it? Well, find a ritual to connect with and find a way to do it even when things are different. So that might be a virtual sing-along. It might be a game night. Drive-by birthday parties have become all the rage these days. Maybe going to church and watching church in the parking lot. But knowing that it's not going to be the same as it usually is, but finding something else to be excited about. So it works a whole lot better to find a new way to do something and say, yep, I'm going to miss doing X, but I'm going to really get excited about doing Y, than trying to fully recreate what you would normally do and have that not be what you were waiting for or expecting, because then it just leads to disappointment. Reach out to others. So as I talked about before, think about those that might need you to reach out to them and make sure you're doing that, but also reach out to those that are helpful for you to hear from. And set times to talk or have a video call. I do this every week. I have certain people that I talk with on a weekly basis, and they're just scheduled in my schedule just like any other appointments. And it's really important for me to have those connections. To be honest with you, I don't always feel like doing it in the moment. It might have been a long day at work. I'm stressed out. I'm feeling kind of sad, and I don't feel like talking to someone else. But I've never found that I've done it and reached out and then I felt worse after. I've always felt a little bit better, if not a lot better. So reaching out even when you don't feel like it. Anxiety, depression, sadness, all those things can make us feel like it's not worth it, or it's too much work or too much effort to reach out. And that might be the time when we need it the most. So scheduling those things, getting yourself set up for success so that you're able to do those things that you know might help, even when you're not really feeling particularly like doing it. One technique that I work with a lot of my teenagers, but also some of the other kids that I work with, is this kind of surfing the wave of strong emotions. This is a really helpful kind of in the moment crisis management tool. If you're feeling a very strong emotion, you might be feeling very panicked or worried or angry. The first thing to do is notice it. Notice that emotion and label it. This is how I'm feeling. You're not trying to get rid of it, ignore it, or make it better. You're just noticing it. Then you're going to check your body's reaction. So where are you feeling that emotion? Is there tension in your body? Are you having your shoulders kind of creep up to your ears? Are your muscles getting tense? Is your stomach feeling upset? Your mind going foggy? And then remembering that you're not your emotions, which can be easier said than done when you're in a big emotion. but we're separate from our emotions. So I'll oftentimes have teenagers kind of envision a glass wall between them, and then their emotion is on the other side. They can see it, it's there, but it's not uptight here. And remembering times you have felt differently. So for some, I'll have them write a list of times when they felt different emotions so that they're able to remember in those moments of difficulty that they have felt joy or calm or peace at other times. Because when we're in those big emotions, it can be hard to think that we were ever feeling something different. And then we want to accept that emotion. So not judging your emotions yourself from having them, but validating that emotion, saying something like, I can deal with this. I've had this emotion before and I'll get through it. During this time of crisis, it's really important that we have some information limits for ourselves and for our kids. So for everyone, it's just easy to get inundated with all the information about COVID-19. It pops up on my phone all the time with all these different news alerts. It seems like you can't turn on the television without seeing something about the coronavirus. Pops up on the bottom of the screen sometimes. I've talked to parents who have said, their kids are just watching a YouTube video about a video game or something random, and then all of a sudden the ad pops up and has something to do with coronavirus. So it's really hard to escape it. But finding your trusted sources, so finding the places that you can get information from that you trust that are going to have the true information that's not going to have a lot of things that are just causing unnecessary anxiety or stress. And then setting your boundaries of when you're going to get this information, from where, and how long you're going to spend with it, and maybe setting some limits on that. So I will turn off notifications on my phone at certain times so that I'm not getting that constant barrage of information. And I can focus on other things as well, because otherwise I just spend all my time kind of looking at that information, which isn't a healthy way to live. Maybe having days that you aren't going to look at information at all, or at least times of the day where you're really just focused on other life things other than finding out information about the coronavirus. For kids, we certainly want to limit exposure to media and adult conversations about COVID-19. And as I talked about prior, we really want to check for understanding, because there is a lot of misinformation out there, and kids can kind of hear something and kind of run with it and end up with a different story than what maybe was the actual truth. One thing that I find very helpful in my personal life, but also in the work that I do with kids and families, is focusing on these concentric circles, or these circles of control. So in the middle, we write the things that we can control. So a lot of times that would be the individual's behavior, the individual's reactions, their choices. Outside is the circle of things that we don't have control over. So things like the weather, what other people do or say. This can be really a helpful kind of anxiety coping tool, because it allows us to focus on those things that we can control and kind of start to let go of the things that are out of our control. Because a lot of times we spend our life trying to focus on those things that are out of our control, and we kind of are spinning our wheels and just getting frustrated or upset or anxious about things that we really don't have any way of doing something about. But instead, if we focus on those things we can control, we can start to have that feeling of security and that feeling that we are able to have some say over our lives. On the right side of the screen is one that someone put together regarding the coronavirus. So in the middle, those things that you can control are having those media limits, turning off the TV and the news, limiting social media. So if we know that leads to more loneliness, having some guidelines for us, and how are we going to check in to see if this is helping or actually making things worse. I can control how I follow CDC recommendations or the safer at home orders. I can't really control what other people do, and if they follow those rules or what I think they should do. I can't control when things are going to open back up or when I'm going to be able to see my patients in person. I can't control how other people are going to react, and I can't control what school will look like when we go back to school, hopefully in the fall. But if I focus on those things in the center, it can help me feel less anxious and help me have a sense of purpose and go forward. And it can help the anxiety for some of the bigger things that I can't control too, because I am focusing on my piece of it. Sometimes the bigger things that are in the I can control just feel kind of overwhelming. So it can be helpful to pick something that really has nothing to do with what you're anxious about and control that. So that could be, I'm really feeling worried about the coronavirus and how this is impacting me and my family. So I'm going to go clean out my sock drawer that's been bugging me for a couple of years. One little thing that I can feel like I'm in control of, and then I can have some positive stuff. And that can oftentimes lead to some momentum and feeling like you can take on more things. So you probably came to this session, this meeting, to thinking that I was going to talk a lot about self-care, and I will. But I left these things for kind of later in the presentation because I really wanted to get that point across that your feelings are okay and normal. And if you're struggling, that's kind of typical right now. So give yourself and those around you a little bit of a break. But we will spend some time talking about those things that are in your control that can help. There's a long list here, and I certainly don't expect you to go home and do all of these things. Find the ones that work for you, and maybe you try a few out this week and try a few out next week and see which of these are really the most helpful for you or for your family to help you feel better and have more balanced emotions. Because you might find that some work really well for you and some maybe aren't as effective. So you've likely heard a lot about sticking to a routine during these times. And I've had a lot of families tell me, well, that's great. I hear that a lot, but how do I do that when things are so challenging? I feel like I can't even get through the morning. So again, that's okay. It's normal to feel kind of overwhelmed, but we do know that predictability helps a lot. It helps with anxiety. It helps with behaviors. So as much as you can, getting into a routine, having some expectations, and that looks different for every family. It might be, in the morning, we're going to focus on schoolwork, and then we're going to eat lunch, and we're going to go outside, and then we're going to have some family time, and then we're going to have some quiet time at night. Or it might be more kind of exact and specific. And we'll talk about how to set a routine for distance learning in a little bit. You want to prioritize and have appropriate expectations for yourself and others. So again, this isn't the time to kind of be making long-term goals and long-term plans. Think about what's most important for you or for those that you're working with today, and what expectations can we have that are actually feasible. Get outside, get some fresh air. Hopefully Mother Nature will cooperate with us and give us some better weather going forward. But we know that it's so helpful for our emotional and physical health to get outside, get some vitamin D, get some sunshine, and move our bodies, which is the next one here. So finding out what works for you to get some exercise, get your body moving, can really help both your physical and emotional well-being. This doesn't mean if you're kind of a couch potato, you should go out and start training for a marathon. It can be something as simple as doing some yoga or finding some fitness classes online. There's a lot of free ones available out there. Or walking around your block. You can start small and see what works for you. We already talked about the importance of reaching out and connecting to others and how important it is to do that during this time. Eating well and staying hydrated, trying to nourish your body with healthy foods and drinking lots of water can help, again, physically and mentally as well. Mindfulness, or focusing on being in the present, can be very helpful. I've been working on meditating, and I've been meditating every night. I think last night was night 52 in a row. And I got to be honest with you, I was thinking about skipping it last night, but then I remembered I was doing this presentation. So thank you all for being my accountability for that. It's something I can do at night for as little as 3 minutes if it's been a really long day, and helps me kind of be in the present and focus on the breath for some time. There's some apps out there. I use Headspace. I know Melanie's family uses Calm, and there's some kid-friendly apps and meditation exercises as well. So it might be something to do as a family. Grounding exercises can be very helpful in big moments of emotion. One that I do with a lot of the kids I work with, but I also do myself, is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game. The idea here is you look for 5 things that you see, 4 things that you feel, like the ground beneath your feet, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and then I always end it with 1 thing that's good about yourself. It can bring you back to your senses and what's happening in the here and now versus that kind of emotion that you're feeling. Finding the good. So looking around at what's good is happening in the world. We're so much hearing all the negative and the scary and the worries, but there is still a lot of good that's happening. There's a lot of helpers out there. There's a lot of people who are selflessly doing for others. So as Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers, find those people that are doing the good things and really pay attention to that so that it can balance that good and the negative that's happening. John Krasinski's Some Good News is something that I watch whenever it comes out because it brings me some joy and some happiness as well. Find the things that you're grateful for. I've had a gratitude journal for many years now, and it's something that I credit with a lot of my joy in the day. And just finding something that you can be thankful for, even on your worst days, and writing it down or saying it aloud, whatever it is, can really be helpful. And it can be difficult to start at first, especially if you're so used to having those kind of negative thoughts or really focusing on the negative. But if you start to practice and start to focus on finding something that you're thankful for, you'll find that it gets easier and easier to do, and it kind of just pops up throughout the day. You're like, oh, yes, I'm thankful for that. I need to remember to write that down. some of my patients have been telling me they've been practicing gratitude while they're washing their hands. We have to be washing our hands for 20 seconds. So while they're doing that, they're thinking of the things that they're grateful for during that day. I think it's a wonderful way to use that time. These last two here, I put a little asterisk by because for a reason. Again, this is the time to have appropriate expectations for yourself. So for some people, developing a new skill or a habit or starting a diet or creating a new masterpiece or writing a book have been things that have been really helpful for them because it's kind of long-term project that they can work on and then they can feel successful about it, and it kind of takes them out of the present moment. So if that's the case for you, if having a big goal or developing some new skill is helpful for you, fantastic, wonderful, then do that. But know that for others, and if it's not helpful for you, that's okay. That can feel overwhelming and like I'm just trying to get through the day. And now you want me to come up with a new masterpiece or do something brand new or learn a new skill. That can feel way too difficult. So if you're in that situation, that's okay as well. That's why I left those to the bottom and put the little asterisk by them. You might consider having a self-care toolkit, and this could be a physical toolkit. For some of the families I work with, they have either like a little shoebox or a little basket, something that has different items in it. It can remind them of different things to do to help take care of themselves. So it might have your favorite kind of tea or a coffee mug to help yourself remember to have a cup of coffee. There might be photos of past vacations or fun events to help you remember those times that you felt really joyful. Might be a coloring book, and there's some great adult coloring books out there. There's some that are like really beautiful flowers or animal coloring books, or there's even some with adult language that others have found to be kind of fun and a way to laugh a little bit while they're engaging in self-care. You might have a journal in there, which could be kind of what our typical journal is, where you're just kind of writing your thoughts and feelings of what's happening. Could be a bullet journal, could be a gratitude journal like I talked about before. Maybe your favorite music is in there, or your headphones to remind yourself to listen to that favorite music. Sometimes your phone numbers of your favorite people. I know we all have our phone numbers in our phones, but sometimes physically seeing those numbers or, hey, a reminder, call this person when you're feeling blue can be helpful and a way to kind of nudge you into doing that when you're not feeling the best. Maybe an inspirational book. For myself, I leave my running shoes out so that I trip over them, because that reminds me that it's so important for me to go for a run even when I don't feel like it, because it helps me feel better kind of in the long run. Any questions, Melanie?
I don't see any new questions at this moment. So if you think of a question, feel free to click on the link and type it in and we'll get to it.
All right, thank you. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about supporting distance learning. So I probably don't have to tell you that distance learning is challenging, and it's challenging for all involved. It's challenging for you because for the most part, you were not educators and you didn't go to school to learn how to be a teacher. And even if you did, teaching and educating your own kids is very different from working in a school setting with all the structure there and teaching other people's kids. You're also, as we talked about before, dealing with all the other stresses of being a parent, and in a lot of cases, a worker as well, and a spouse in some cases. For children, this is very out of their element. They're out of their structure and their routine that they're used to, and they're dealing with all the anxiety and stress as well. I've had a lot of kids that I work with tell me, like, well, I don't understand why I'm supposed to be doing schoolwork at home. This is home, not school. I do that work at school. I don't do it at home. And that kind of rigid thinking can make it more challenging. There can be a lot more distractions at home too. At school, they don't have to worry about their dog coming up and wanting to play fetch, or being able to look out all of the windows, or getting to just walk to the fridge and get whatever they want at any time. For educators, it's a challenge too. I mean, educators love your kids and they love teaching them. And they're used to being able to do that in a very different situation than what they can do now. So trying to meet the individual needs of the kids that they work with in this new technology world, and meeting everybody where they're at is very difficult as well. So what can we do about it? Well, the first thing we want to do is simplify and prioritize, and that came up again. So understanding that under these pressures, doing your best work as a student or an educator, a parent, or a worker is just unrealistic in a lot of cases. So being okay with the fact that things are challenging and we're going to do the best that we can, and it might not be to the same level as you're used to doing. It might be giving yourself a validating mantra. So as parents, you might tell yourself, I'm not homeschooling. I'm doing my best to help my kids learn during a crisis. As a worker, you might tell yourself, I'm not working from home. I'm doing my best to get my work done during a crisis. I talk to the teachers about telling themselves, I'm doing my best to support my students during an unprecedented time. And for all of us, we can say, I can't be as productive as normal because these are not normal times. I'm going to focus on what I can control and accomplish in this next 24 hours, maybe even an hour. And I'm going to let go of what I can't accomplish right now. We really want to work on having feasible goals for the specific child, the specific parent, the specific educator on that specific day and time under these specific circumstances. So what that all goes to say is that it's going to look different for you than it is for your neighbor, than it is for your cousin. And that's okay. Educators are wonderful people, and they're really good at meeting kids where they are and meeting their needs. So I have all the faith in the world that when we are able to go back to a better kind of sense of normal and get back to a school building, that educators are going to figure out ways to meet all the kids where they're coming from, and knowing that they're not all getting the same educational support at home right now as they might be, and that some kids are getting more and some kids are getting less. And that's okay. But what can we do to help? So we can have some structure. So again, that routine and predictability come up again, and this can be very common during times of stress. What I found is that working together to come up with a schedule works a lot better than adults just trying to push the agenda. I was talking to a family who the mom spent hours and hours developing this gorgeous, just beautiful plan for how their days were going to go. It was down to like every 10 minutes. It was just gorgeous, but it failed. Didn't work very well. And when we worked together and we came up with a plan as a family, and the child got to help develop that idea and what would work for them, it worked a whole lot better. It wasn't smooth sailing, but it worked a lot better than when it was just the adult kind of saying, this is how I want things to go. If possible, we want to include choice times in there. So times when the child gets to decide what they want to do. And they won't all have to be electronics choice times. It can be sometimes they get to have electronics as a choice, and sometimes they don't. But having times when it's not just, this is what you need to do, schoolwork, chore, schoolwork. We want to use the pre-math principle, which is a fancy way of saying that we want to kind of grandma's rule. You have to eat your veggies before you get dessert. You have to do math before you get to play outside. Whatever it is that kind of works in that child's life about how we help support getting the stuff that we don't like doing as much done by having some positives coming after. And what I've been really pushing to parents, but also to educators, is that it's your job as a parent to help your child feel safe and supported and loved. And yes, do their best with distance learning, but I'm so much more focused on helping them feel safe and secure during this time. And as I mentioned before, the educators that I've spoken to have felt the same way, that we really need to help kids emotionally and psychologically do their best during this time. We'll worry about the learning, we'll worry about the education. But if you're having that constant struggle, I would much rather have you support your children's psychological needs. This might be having emotional checkpoints during the day. So if you're noticing that there's meltdowns every day when you're trying to do homework, maybe checking in a little bit earlier. How are we doing? How are you feeling? Do we need to take a break? What are some things we can do now so that it doesn't lead to that meltdown coming later in the day? Using things like timers can be helpful. So setting up how much time they get to do for their free time, or how much time they're supposed to spend on a certain assignment before kind of checking in, whatever works for in your family, that can be a helpful tool and strategy. And then building in those reinforcing activities. And again, it doesn't always have to be video games. It could be getting to choose what's a board game to play, or getting to watch a show on TV, or getting to go outside or pet the dog, whatever it is that we're going to kind of build in throughout the day. And then we want to support. So as I said before, it's normal to have more emotional and behavioral outbursts during this time. So expect that you're going to have more of those when you're trying to support distance learning. We want to work together in coming up with a calming menu before there are problems. So as much as we can, we want to anticipate difficulties rather than just reacting to difficulties. So if you're finding that math time is always stressful when you're trying to do math, work together as a team to come up with some different ideas to help make math go more smoothly. And then maybe we have a picture of those things that are helpful. Taking some deep breaths, doing lemon squeezes, which are like squeezing your hands together hard to do some muscle tension and relaxation. Whatever it is that's going to be calming for that child in that situation. And we have those available to use before there are problems, so we don't have to just react. And remembering that, especially in times of crisis, that one thing that seemed to be the trigger that led to the kind of meltdown or the behavioral difficulty isn't probably the whole story. That the straw that broke the camel's back isn't probably the whole thing. So really collaborating and problem solving together to keep problems from happening, and then waiting until we're both in that rainbow arc again before we're trying to problem solve for the future. So it's not the time in that big hot moment to be problem solving. We want to be able to calm down first, because kids are unable to learn from what we're saying and doing in that time. And thinking about this opportunity that we have to help kids learn to manage big feelings under stress, we're also helping them learn how to deal with a crisis. Unfortunately, our kids are going to have to be dealing with other stressful things in their lives. And this is a chance for us to kind of show them and work with them on how to do that. So thinking of the kind of the positive again, and what they might be learning under this time that they wouldn't be able to learn in the normal kind of typical going to school. I've had some families who have told me they've really focused on things like adaptive functioning, like learning how to do clothes, or learning how to make a certain meal, because those are things that their kids can really benefit from, but haven't been able to focus on when they've been in school. So the takeaways that I hope you got from this presentation are, again, you can't pour from an empty cup. Taking care of yourself and your emotional and psychological needs is essential. It's not selfish. Kids learn more from what we do than what we say. So if you're modeling self-care and self-compassion, you're teaching that to your children more so than you could just sit down and telling them to do that for themselves. Have appropriate expectations for yourself and others during this time. It's okay to have a plan and a goal for right now, or for the next hour, or the next week, versus having a 2-month plan. Practice your coping strategies and support others in using those healthy coping strategies. And we will get through this together, one day at a time. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I have all the faith that we can get through it together. If you need more, please reach out. Reach out to a family member or friend. You'll probably find that they're having similar feelings, and it can be very helpful just to get it out there, share how you're feeling. If you haven't already established therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist, it might be the time to reach out and get an appointment scheduled there. All of the providers that I know are available to do video consults or phone consults during this time if we're not seeing people in person. So they're still there for you. If you don't already have an established therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist, perhaps reach out to your primary care physician to get a referral in, to get connected with someone, or reach out to insurance companies or look online for some providers that are available who don't take insurance as well. Here are a number of resources that can be helpful for resources for emotional and psychological well-being always, but especially during this time. One that I wanted to point out specifically, and that the link is provided for you, is the Coronavirus Anxiety Workbook. This is a wonderful resource that was put together by some great clinicians that has evidence-based strategies and support, some of which we've talked about here today, on helping support yourself if you're feeling anxious. It's developed for adults. There's some pieces of it that you could use for children as well, but use it yourself, pass it along to those that you might find it helpful. They've made it available and free to share, which I think is pretty wonderful. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or conversation.
We do have one question, and it says, where do parental expectations fall in this no control circle? I cannot control my teenagers, nor do I want to. How do we balance that loss of control when my parental expectations go ignored by my teenagers? She can't get them to go to bed on time, to wake up, or to limit their gaming, etc.
Right. So when I talk to kids and teenagers about that, their parental expectations, they can't control what you expect, but they can certainly control if they're going to do it. And unfortunately, you can't physically kind of make them do it, especially as they're teenagers. So I think it's kind of collaborating and working together when things are calm and figuring out, okay, as a family, what are our expectations and our responsibilities going to be? And as a parent, what do you have control over that you can have as a consequence there? So if they don't do X, Y, and Z, you have control over the consequence piece to it, but really trying to work together so it doesn't get to that point. So you kind of have a team effort of, this is what's really important to me, this is what's really important to you, how can we kind of meet in the middle? But of course, as you are the parent, you have those expectations and there's consequences for not following them. But if you can kind of try to collaborate beforehand, that usually works out.
And I don't have any more questions at this point. So I just want to say thank you very much, Dr. Bourne, for being available to talk with our parents like this and to answer questions. It's been very helpful, I think, for a lot of parents, and I hope many more tune into this beyond this presentation today. But thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening and taking the time. I know we're all under a lot of time crunch now, but I appreciate it.